Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this Sunday. I'm Frederica Whitfield. All right, we begin this hour with fast-moving flames ripping through most of the most popular tourist spots in the U.S., Yosemite National Park. The Washburn fire has burned nearly 1,600 acres of the park and doubled in size in just the last 24 hours. Flames are also threatening the famed Mariposa Grove, where more than 500 giant sequoia trees have lived for thousands of years. CNN's Renee Marsh joining me right now with more on this. Renee, so what is happening at the park today to help battle this fire?
Yeah, Fred, so at this hour, hundreds of firefighters are working in searing temperatures to fight this fire, not just from the ground, but by air. And this section of the Sequoia National Park, this section of Yosemite National Park is home to more than 500 giant sequoia trees, the world's tallest trees. And firefighters have put a sprinkler system around that famed sequoia known as the grizzly giant to protect it from the flames that are just ripping through the national park at this hour. This famed tree standing at 209 feet, the National Park Service says it is the second largest tree in Yosemite. And what we know about this fire, you hit it at the top, is that it has doubled in size in the past 24 hours, and so far nearly 1,600 acres have already burned, and fire officials are warning that they do expect this fire to continue to grow, Fred, as they are also expecting continued unusually hot temperatures out west.
Oh my goodness. All right. So escalating drought, climate change, horrible combination, also adding to this yearly threat of wildfires, right? So how are federal officials dealing with all of that?
Yeah, I mean, we have been talking to, on the federal level, National Park Service, and this is something that they are actually very concerned about as far as the impact of climate change on places like these national parks. And I can tell you, most of the national parks across the United States are impacted. If it's not by extreme temperatures and wildfires, then it's sea level rise. And so they are working on the federal level with partners like NOAA. They are working with the Army Corps of Engineers to come up with more in-depth climate plans so that they can hopefully make these national parks a bit more resilient to our growingly more extreme climate. So there is this need. I will just say one other thing, Fred. Just last week, members of Congress were at Yosemite National Park, led by Congressman Quigley from Illinois, and they were looking at this very issue of the impact of climate change on national parks. They hope to bring that information back here to Washington, D.C. so that they can better understand how to appropriate those federal dollars for the national parks.
Wow. And here it is, what we're seeing underway. All right, Renee Marsh, thank you so much.
Sure.
And of course, the greatest challenge right now for firefighters battling the flames out west, record heat. Let's get to CNN meteorologist Chad Myers in the Weather Center. Chad.
Fred, it is going to be another day out there with temperatures above 100 degrees, low humidity, and a little bit of wind. These firefighters are getting no break whatsoever. Now this fire is almost 1,600 acres and growing quite rapidly. It is very hot. All the stresses put on the firefighters, all of the dead trees in the area also burning the underbrush here. Look at the Fresno will be 107 tomorrow. A little bit higher in the mountains will maybe go 103, but try to be fighting a fire at that type of temperature. There's the rainfall off to the east, the monsoon coming into Arizona and New Mexico over the next couple days, but certainly no rain for California. 61 major fires in 9 separate states. But here's the number that we need to focus on. 4.6 million, almost 4.7 million acres burned already in 2022. Now the average for this date over the last 10 years is 2.2 million. We are double the number of acres that have already burned across the country, and that's including Alaska, because there are also some major destructive fires burning in Alaska right now. No end in sight to this fire season. Fred.
Oh my gosh, and those numbers are extraordinary. Chad Myers, thanks so much. All right, joining me right now on the phone is Park Ranger Scott Getteman. He is the Chief Public Affairs Officer for Yosemite National Park. Ranger Getteman, so glad you could be with us. So what is the latest on how many acres have burned in total, evacuations, closures, all that?
Yes, thank you for having me. The latest couple of great reports that we just heard, we're still at about 1,600 acres. We have evacuated the Wawona area at the southern part of the park, which is about 5 miles north of the Mariposa Grove. That evacuation started on Friday afternoon. It's important that people know Yosemite National Park remains open. The park is open, and we're certainly impacted by fire and smoke. The southern entrance is closed, but the other entrances are open, and as the fire continues to move, as was mentioned before, we're continuing to attack the fire by both the air and the ground. This is a 100% suppression fire. Our top priority, of course, is protecting the firefighters, park employees, and park residents, and also suppressing the fire as quickly and safely as we can.
So while you spell out that there are some portions of the park that are a lot more vulnerable and more dangerous than others, and the park remains open, what are you telling park goers to be mindful of or to do? How do they respect these very volatile conditions right now?
Well, there's a lot that visitors can do. First of all, and most importantly, is for ask people to be patient. What's happening is now that the south entrance, one of the busiest entrances, is closed, that means the other entrances are extremely busy. So we have long lines of vehicles waiting to get in, so we ask people to be patient. We also ask people to be very cognizant of the air quality. Right now, it's very unhealthy air quality in Yosemite Valley, for example, so we're asking people to just be responsible, and if someone has, for example, respiratory issues, to be very careful in hiking and choosing their activities, and just be aware of their surroundings, and to just, of course, stay out of the closed areas and understand that these firefighters are working incredibly hard, as was mentioned, in difficult, steep terrain, and we want to give them all of the tools and support that we can so they can help us suppress this fire.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because looking at these images, I mean, the smoke is really thick in some spots. So, last fall we talked about foil being wrapped around the trees in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, and now we're seeing and hearing about a sprinkler system set up near the Mariposa Grove. Is that going to be enough? And talk to me about how complicated that has been.
Well, the giant sequoias are incredibly beautiful trees and historically important. The Mariposa Grove, as was mentioned, is home to 500 mature giant sequoias. We've been very proactive in fire management, so we've had some prescribed burns in the area in the past, and there have also been some lightning strike fires in and around the grove over the last several years, and so that's helped us, clear a lot of the dead and down brush, which helps the sequoias be more resistant to fire. Fire is important. In fact, it's critical for giant sequoias for them to have the seeds come out of the cones, to regenerate the soil, provide habitat for animals. So fire is naturally part of the ecosystem, but it's these high-intensity fires that are causing the damage that happened, for example, in the Creek Fire and the KCF complex last year in Sequoia National Park. So what we're doing is we do have the sprinkler system at the Grizzly Giant, one of our largest trees that you mentioned, and we're also wrapped we wrap what's called the Galen Clark Cabin, which is a historical cabin in the Upper Grove. But the rest of the sequoias, we're feeling really good, because with the work that we've done with the prescribed burns that I mentioned, they are resilient to fire. So we're feeling really good. Cautious, of course, about the giant sequoias, but we've got incredibly skilled, hardworking firefighters around the area. We have an incident management team, so we're getting tremendous support from both National Park Service, our federal partners, county, state firefighters, and it's just been wonderful to see the collaborative effort on suppressing this fire.
And then, Ranger Getterman, how close are the flames to those trees that you just mentioned?
Well, they're very close, and they're right around it. And so what we're doing right now is we're doing a combination of cutting fire line, looking at burning out some other areas but around the giant sequoias, and basically protecting them. And then the community of Wawona is about 5 miles north of the fire, and with some spotting, meaning embers have gone through the air and have lit some other trees on fires. That's what prompted the evacuation. evacuation.
So when you say close, are you talking within feet, within yards, within miles?
Within miles, within a couple of miles. And so there's the Wawona Hotel, the oldest hotel in the park, beautiful historic hotel, the Wawona Campground in the community. So right now the fire's within, about between a mile or two, and that's what, prompted the evacuation. And so that's going to stay in place, but again, the rest of the park is open, and we're basically trying to chase the spots. And with the hot weather that was mentioned, and people need to understand also, this is steep, heavily forested terrain, and so the air support is certainly helpful, but we've got a lot of hotshot crews and firefighters on the ground that are going in to suppress the fire. So it's really a ground and air attack coordinated that is going to get us to the suppression that we're aiming toward as soon as we can.
Park Ranger Scott Getteman, thank you so much, and of course, all the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, still to come, one of former President Trump's closest allies says he is willing to testify before the January 6th committee. We'll tell you what was behind his change of heart and what committee members are actually saying about it now.
Have you heard it like this?
Let's untangle the players and political forces.
Fast-paced news from the perspective of The Global Brief with Bianca Nobilo. Weeknights on CNN.
You've seen this explosion of life, and life has come back because of a new habitat that's been created with a whole load of big animals. So we went from this very intensive conventional farming system to a free-roaming, animal-based habitat creation project, rewilding.
One of the things you can do is introduce free-roaming herbivores, and all of them, the way they disturb the land, the way they trample and rootle, everything that they do has a hugely important knock-on effect, a sort of domino effect for biodiversity. We've seen here some of the rarest species in Britain. An amazing species that we had never had here before is the turtle dove. And we're probably the only piece of land in the UK where turtle dove numbers are actually rising.
This butterfly is an incredibly rare butterfly. Here you can see it in their hundreds.
It's about kicking off natural processes again in a system, and then as human beings trying to stand back from it as much as possible and let nature perform.
To see a landscape in your own country and what you've been missing suddenly come to life has been this extraordinary revelation, this surprise, this this feeling of just joy that we can do it.
I'm Jim Bitterman in Paris, and this is CNN.
All right, we're following several major new developments in the January 6th investigation. Steve Bannon, one of Donald Trump's closest allies and his former advisor, now says he is willing to testify under oath before the committee after the former president waived claims to executive privilege for him.
We got the letter around midnight from his lawyer saying that he would testify, and we have wanted him to testify. I expect that we will be hearing from him, and there are many questions that we have for him.
Would it be a public hearing, or would it be behind closed doors?
Ordinarily, we do depositions. This goes on for hour after hour after hour. We want to get all our questions answered, and you can't do that in a live format.
Bannon's announcement comes as the January 6th committee is preparing to hold 2 more hearings this week. The panel expects to play video clips from former White House counsel Pat Cipollone, who testified for nearly 8 hours on Friday. With me now to talk more about all of this is Norm Eisen. He is a CNN legal analyst, and so good to see you, Ambassador. So let's start with Steve Bannon saying he's now willing to testify as he's about to go on trial for refusing to comply with the subpoena from the committee. So what do you make of this reversal, and do you indeed see that it will happen with no conditions?
Fred, thanks for having me back. Well, Steve Bannon is facing criminal contempt prosecution and a very strong case. So I see this as a last-minute ploy with his longtime ally, Donald Trump, to try to muddy the waters in the criminal case, Fred. But I don't think the committee, prosecutors, or the court are going to fall for that. I think instead what we're going to see is the requirement for Bannon to come in, no preconditions, and tell the truth. If he does that, then we can see about the criminal case. But nobody should drop that criminal case until we get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth from Steve Bannon.
And in a similar fashion than other witnesses have testified, you have a tape deposition first before there's, the live testimony that might take place.
Yeah, and I expect that if he is willing to come in, we'll see if he's willing to come in without conditions. He's got some very uncomfortable questions that he's going to have to answer about the formation of this conspiracy to overturn the election, alleged conspiracy, about his role in ginning that up, about the war room for the attempted coup in the Willard Hotel. So let's see if he tells the truth. If he does, then the committee and the court and the prosecutors can consider whether to go forward with the criminal case, but not before then.
Former White House counsel Pat Cipollone, we know he spent nearly 8 hours talking to the committee under oath on Friday, and today members of the committee suggested that video clips of that testimony will play a role in this week's hearings, including on Thursday night, a primetime hearing where the committee does expect to focus on what Trump did and didn't do during the insurrection. Take a listen.
We will have some excerpts of Mr. Cipollone's testimony. He was able to provide information on basically all of the critical issues that we're looking at, and including the president's, what I would call dereliction of duty on the day of January 6th.
The rest of the country knew that there was an insurrection. The president obviously had to have known there was an insurrection. So where was he? What was he doing? It's a very important hearing. Pay attention, because I think it goes to the heart of what is the oath of a leader. You have an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States.
They referenced dereliction of duty and oath to the Constitution. So what's the significance of the words that we just heard from them?
Well, we're very focused on January 6th, Fred, and I think Cipollone, reading the tea leaves, including from CNN's reporting from multiple sources about what he testified, he's going to be able to corroborate Donald Trump's inaction during that infamous 187 minutes on January 6th when he could have made a difference, but not just in action, Fred, because we know from other witnesses, including Cassidy Hutchison, that Trump actually agreed with the crowd that was chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and that he sent out that tweet a little bit after 2 o'clock on the 6th, inciting violence against Pence. So I think that's part of Cipollone's testimony, but much, much more, of course. He witnessed the birth of the conspiracy. We know this hearing on Tuesday is going to go back to December 18th, a critical meeting at which the really intense assault continued to grow.
And then coincidentally, or maybe not, these hearings in D.C. will be taking place at the same time when a special grand jury in Georgia is investigating efforts by Trump and his allies to try to overturn the election results in the state of Georgia. So this week, several high-profile allies of the former president were subpoenaed, including South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. And Graham's attorneys are challenging that subpoena. You just co-wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Post saying Graham is not above the law and must comply with the subpoena. How far will he go to perhaps not comply?
Well, he seems to have fully taken on Donald Trump's contempt for the rule of law. It's a great disappointment to those of us who have known him and worked with him for decades in Washington, D.C. But as a Trump acolyte with total disregard for the Constitution of the law, he'll fight to the last breath. But Fred, as I wrote in the Post, he has no basis to do that. The Constitution's speech and debate clause, which he relies upon, yes, it protects him if you attempt to hold him accountable for something he does on the floor of the Senate. But this was a pure political act. He apparently, according to the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia, wanted votes for Biden thrown out. So there's no protection for testifying about possible crimes you may have committed. So he'll go far, but he'll lose.
Yeah, and who can forget, I mean, some of his words after the insurrection when he seemed very exacerbated, frustrated, like so many Americans, and said, "I'm out," but then his words and his actions didn't necessarily support that later. So we shall see, won't we? Well, this is going to be a pivotal week, we know. All right, Norm Eisen, good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Fred.
All right, still ahead. Demand is starting to outpace supply of the monkeypox vaccine in some states. We'll discuss straight ahead.
I would describe One World as compelling, inclusive, and original. I want this show to be a place where everyone watching has a stake in the global conversation.
One World with Zain Asher, weeknights on CNN.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
My name is Khadija Behzad. I'm the founder and CEO of Meet the Locals. Meet the Locals is a social Emirati tourism company. We are specialized in Emirati culture. We design and deliver authentic Emirati experiences. I noticed that many visitors are coming to the UAE and they are visiting the different attractions and they are leaving without getting the chance of meeting local people. We as locals or Emiratis in the UAE, we are only 10 to 11% of the total population. Locals can give deeper information about the culture, so tourists will get the information from the source. It's important for us to create such programs in order to interact with expats, whether they are tourists or residents.
This is a really important story. My name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN.
Assalamu alaikum.
Day in, day out, you see the reality of people living through this.
Ничего страшного.
Okay.
This is the front line.
On a human level, you find courage, sacrifice. This is what life is about.
A lot of people are wondering why.
You see the worst of humanity.
Putin might use a nuclear weapon. Absolutely terrifying.
But you also see the best of humanity. My My job is to be present.
The human cost is right here.
And to tell these stories.
We're talking about families.
That is the most important thing. I'm Clarissa Ward in Ukraine. This is CNN.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN partner hotels, connected to your world.
I'm David McKenzie in Cape Town, and this is CNN.
As monkeypox cases continue to rise globally, the World Health Organization is again considering whether to declare a public health emergency of international concern. Last month, the WHO's Emergency Committee found that the outbreak did not meet the criteria, but new numbers are raising concerns among officials now. The latest data from the CDC shows that the U.S. has over 750 confirmed or suspected cases of the disease. For more now, I want to bring in Dr. Saira Madad. She is the Senior Director for the Special Pathogens Program at New York City Health and Hospitals. So good to see you, Dr. Madad. So to get this outbreak under control, what is most needed right now?
Well, I think first we're a bit flying blind in the monkeypox epidemic. We're not exactly sure how many cases we have here in the U.S., obviously, let alone around the world. Our testing capability has expanded, so now commercial LabCorp has been brought online to increase testing capability. So that will help overall in being able to detect more cases, but we know it's certainly not enough, and it's not just having the test available, it's also making sure people understand why it's important to get tested, and clinicians also know to test and look out for this virus. So I think what we need to do is obviously continue to expand our testing capability, continue to expand vaccination eligibility and availability. Right now we're very limited in the vaccine supply that we have available, the Genios, for example, in particular. And we want to also make sure clinicians are looking out for this virus. So it's very, I wouldn't say hard to detect, but it could be easily missed because of just the presentation of it. And so we just need to do a better job of, sharing what we know, doing more testing, having more infrastructure, and very importantly, making sure that people understand, especially those that are at most risk, and this includes men that have sex with men, that are bisexual, transgender, and the like, that they understand the risk that this is having in the community and the risk that's posed to them, and that they should certainly seek healthcare professionals. But that's also not to say anybody can get the monkeypox virus, and so anybody here in the U.S. as well as around the world, if you have a unexplained rash, or you've been in contact with somebody that has monkeypox, or you think they have monkeypox, is to seek healthcare services, get tested, and see what options are available to you.
And then there's this pattern of missteps, right? With testing and vaccine enrollment, glitches in appointment scheduling, vaccine demand outweighing supply. I mean, health is more important than ever, yet it seems the tools that people need in these kinds of outbreaks is not keeping up. How concerned are you about patients losing confidence in public health officials and programs?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I am very concerned. We have been through this rodeo before with the COVID-19 pandemic where we were flying blind, and now we obviously have safe and effective vaccines and therapeutics. It's now a lot about, making sure people are up to date with vaccinations, they have the right information. And now as we look at the monkeypox epidemic that's occurring, it's very similar. We're seeing very similar parallels where we are limited in what we can do from a public health capability, at least at the local level. So here in New York City, as as you've mentioned, vaccine supplies were made available, and then very quickly appointments were taken. So we just don't have enough. So everyone's trying to do their best, especially at the local level, but it's the constraints and the supply that we have and making sure the messaging is accurate. So we just need to do more of it. We need to make sure that federal, at all levels, but especially at the federal level, that we are understanding that this is an emergency, that we need to continue to have an all hands on deck approach and do something very fast and rapidly to try to put a lid on this epidemic. And we know that, as you mentioned, the World Health Organization is going to meet very shortly to see if this is a outbreak of international concern. I certainly do think it has met all the criteria for it, so it is time to declare this, certainly an international outbreak of concern, so we can have more support and more communication on this.
In fact, New York City's health commissioner said at a news conference that, the city that you're in, New York, is the epicenter of America's monkeypox outbreak. And some members of the vulnerable communities living there describe feeling a return to the HIV stigma. What's your response to those fears?
Yeah, I think they're certainly justified. This is a virus that we've known about for decades, but it certainly is new here, for example, in the United States, and we haven't seen it explode to this extent. It is, I would say it's very, very fearful. It is, people are anxious. What does this threat mean to me? What do I need to do about it? And so I think there's a couple of things that I'll just very quickly mention. As we talk about monkeypox, it is a very self-limiting disease, so we're not going to see hospitals overrun with monkeypox patients. Majority of the time, folks can stay home and just do supportive care, but it's not a benign virus. And what I mean by that is that it can cause significant morbidity. People do, suffer greatly. There could be significant pain, many other complications, secondary bacterial infections. So it's not a virus that, is benign where, it's like the common cold and you bounce back after a couple of days. It is pretty significant. And so I want to make sure we are messaging this out correctly, that this is a threat. It is growing. We have the tools. We just need to do more of it, and we need to get more of these resources to the people that need it the most.
Wow, just so much to worry about, but so much in which to take action on as well. Dr. Saira Madad, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Connect the World with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran. We are in Jerusalem.
Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the World with Becky Anderson, Monday through Friday on CNN.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school? Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life. Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
We've missed the globetrotting and adventures, and we're longing to get out and go.
This is living.
Uncovering a city's DNA, meeting people who will share its secrets.
I love being here.
And making discoveries that wow.
You've got to be joking. Nice here, isn't it?
It's a world of wonder. Now, go and see it. Saturday on CNN, in association with Turkish Airlines.
All right, tomorrow, Texas lawmakers are expected to grill law enforcement about the deadly shooting at Robb Elementary that left 19 young children and 2 teachers dead. Among those testifying, the Uvalde sheriff, who has agreed to cooperate as long as it doesn't jeopardize the criminal investigation. And then later on today, a group of citizens planning to march on City Hall calling for accountability. CNN's Nadia Romero is here with me. I mean, it's been 7 weeks. I mean, it's hard to believe that there are still so many questions unanswered and a whole lot of frustration and anguish that, of course, will be here for a very long time.
It's going to be here for a long time, and the goal is to remember those 21 lives, those people who were killed in that school shooting, to remember them, to honor them, and also to rally around those survivors and the remaining elementary school students who will have to go back to school in the fall. And so the plan is to start at Robb Elementary and then make their way to the town center to demand accountability. And when you talk to those survivors, family members of the victims, they say it's almost impossible to heal, to move forward, to do anything without accountability. And so we sat down with one of the teachers who was inside of that school. He was shot twice during the shooting, Arnie Reyes, and many of his students were killed as he laid on the ground playing dead, hoping that law enforcement would come in and save him and his students in his classroom. Listen to what he says when he found out that those law enforcement officers were outside of his classroom for a very long time. Take a listen.
I didn't find that out until after the fact, when I seen other videos where they're standing in the hallways, and that even makes me more upset. Just knowing you're a few feet away from me and you're not helping me. You're not helping anybody.
Oh, just heartbreaking to hear him and to see him still very much bandaged up from his own wounds. So that rally march today, tomorrow, as you mentioned, Fred, will be the sheriff, Nolasco, will be sitting down in front of the Texas House Special Committee, sitting down, answering questions, as long as he says they don't violate or interfere with his criminal investigation. But he is under fire, and there's a lot of criticism about the police response or the lack of law enforcement response.
Right. I mean, we can feel the pain and the anguish still in Mr. Reyes and really the entire community and country for that matter. Everyone is very angry about this still. All right, thank you so much, Nadia Romero. Appreciate it. All right, still ahead, Elon Musk versus Twitter. The billionaire wants out of his deal to buy the company. Twitter says they'll force him to see it through, setting the stage for a potentially major legal battle. We'll discuss next.
The Omega Seamaster is the longest running product line still produced by Omega. The Omega Seamaster was first introduced in 1948 and was loosely based upon designs that were made for the British Royal Navy towards the end of World War II. What's interesting is most Omega Seamasters will have a seahorse adorned case back. So in the back of the case of the watch, you'll see a seahorse. And this actually pays tribute to Neptune, the Roman god of the sea. The seahorse logo was actually conceived by the engraver Jean-Pierre Burrell, who also has a bit of history with the sea and also from an artistic perspective. And he was actually inspired by an image of Neptune driving a chariot pulled by seahorses, which is why the seahorses are, again, depicted wearing bridles and on the back of Omega's Seamaster-based watches.
It's going to be difficult to hire the right people unless you as a company provide some level of hybrid working. And this is not for all companies, but for quite a large proportion of companies, it's seen as being a fundamental part of the workplace offer, part of the job offer. So this is all about providing places for people to work and work with other people, but all of those people may not be for the same company, but just about anywhere. And it's that flexibility of the workplace that's what companies and people are looking for. A revolution is the way to describe it, because it's a fundamental change to the way people want to work and companies want to support their workers. And it's a permanent change, and it will be one of the lasting legacies of the pandemic.
The beauty of the photograph is that when people do view the images, they have that visceral response. And I think when we can see an image of a fellow brother or sister around the world and we connect to that person, it brings it home, it makes it personal. My name is Lisa Christine, and I'm a humanitarian photographer. I believe that we can all do something to help in the fight against slavery. Something that really stands out to me is my experience that I had on Lake Volta in Ghana, where thousands of kids are enslaved in the fishing villages. The kids there work an inordinate amount of hours on an enormous body of water, although they're not taught how to swim. They are fishing and pulling in nets, and it's pretty intense out there on that lake. There's a young boy named Kofi who I met at a shelter. He had actually very recently been rescued. And I made this particular image at a well where this young boy was bathing. And he has all these water droplets on his face. But the thing that really stands out to me is that some months later, I learned that he had been reunited with his family. And then he got to go to school. And I think, well, who is he going to become because somebody took a stand for him?
These troops, they are Russian. I've spoken to the commander. He said they are now in control. It's a secret location. They're going to fire on Russian forces.
You downplayed the US intelligence assessments. Do you now regret that?
It is at least a chance to save their own lives. Matthew Chance, CNN.
I'm David Culver in Beijing, and this is CNN.
I'm Julia Chatterley, host of CNN's First Move. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers. Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley, weekdays.
All right, the world's wealthiest person wants out of his plan to buy social media giant Twitter. Elon Musk says he intends to terminate the $44 billion deal, citing what he calls, and I'm quoting now, a material breach of multiple provisions, end quote, of the original agreement. But some legal experts warn that may not be enough to break the deal without paying a huge penalty. Here to talk about it now, business law professor at Tulane University Law School, Ann Lipton. All right, Professor Lipton, break it down for us. So in your view, does it seem like there's enough of a breach of contract for Musk to break this deal with Twitter?
No, obviously, who knows what could come out in a court case, which we're likely to see. But right now, he hasn't identified very much that Twitter has done wrong here. He's basically, one of his main accusations is that Twitter misled him about the amount of spam it has on the platform. But the interesting thing about merger agreements is, even if there are false representations in the agreement, that's actually not a reason to walk away. Musk would have to show that the false representations were not just false, but so bad that they had some kind of material consequential impact on Twitter for long-term earnings potential. And that's just not something he's been able to show, at least so far.
Or,
so
or even prove that it would have to be intentionally misleading the potential buyer? Is that part of it too?
No, actually, that's not necessary. If he can show that this was false and that it is going to have some kind of long-term impact on Twitter's economics going forward, that would be enough to walk away. But he hasn't shown it's false, and certainly hasn't shown that kind of economic impact.
Wow. Okay, so Twitter's board chairman, Brett Taylor, tweeted in response that the Twitter board is committed to closing the transaction on the price and terms agreed upon with Mr. Musk and plans to pursue legal action to enforce the merger agreement. I mean, the price agreed in April was $54.20 a share. And if Musk does back out, what potentially could happen?
Well, Twitter, it looks like, is planning to sue him to force him to close the deal. So this is very likely to go to court. It looks like Twitter's about to file some kind of complaint where they'll ask a court to declare that they are not in breach of the agreement and to order Musk to fulfill his obligations. And that's something that Delaware courts have done. This is not the first time a buyer has gotten cold feet in a merger. And courts have in the past ordered, no, you have to close. So that is one possibility, that the court would force Musk to live up to his end of the deal.
So if Musk truly wants out, would it better serve him to just simply pay, what would it be, a $1 billion fine to say I'm out, as opposed to going to court to allow Twitter to pursue him? Might he lose more by going to court than if he were to just say, all right, I'll just pay the fine right now, $1 billion? Well,
he doesn't really have the option of paying the fine. I mean, Twitter won't accept that, and that's not really Elon Musk's choice to make. Twitter is the one that sort of has the option of suing for, of terminating the agreement and suing for $1 billion if they think he's in breach, or seeking to force Musk to close. And of course, from Twitter's perspective, this is a no-brainer. Of course, they'd rather have 44 billion than one. So, Elon Musk doesn't get to just choose, oh, well, I'll just pay $1 billion and walk away. This is Twitter's choice to make in a courtroom, of course.
So if he digs in his heels, Twitter's going to take him to court. I mean, how do you see it playing out? How potentially ugly could it get?
Oh, it could get quite ugly. I mean, I assume that Elon Musk has every incentive to drag it out as long as possible, because every second he's not paying money is benefit to him. He will want it to make a litigation expensive and painful and embarrassing to Twitter, to make Twitter want to, sort of settle for something less than the $54.20 that he promised. And I mean, this could go on for months at the very least, and that's quick for litigation, but Delaware courts can move quickly when they need to. It could go on for months. There could be an appeal to the Delaware Supreme Court if the parties don't resolve matters. And the question is really whether a Delaware court will, in fact, I mean, first of all, whether Twitter can prove, its case that Musk is actually the one who's threatening to breach the deal, and whether a court will go ahead and order specific performance. In other words, Musk to follow through on his obligations.
Wow, what a mess, huh? All right. Tulane University's Ann Lipton, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Still ahead, Russia's war on Ukraine is taking a devastating toll on countries thousands of miles away from the front lines. Somalia is being pushed dangerously close to famine as Putin's war disrupts critical food supply lines. We'll take you there next.
Today, we live in an unpredictable environment, and news races around the world at breakneck speed. The missile struck right here. My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. What is your interpretation of Putin's intention? What does President Putin think he has achieved In Ukraine, what are the UN and other countries doing for you? What do you think an end to this looks like?
We just want to say stop to Vladimir Putin.
Amanpour, weeknights on CNN.
Potato custodians are basically the guardians of the traditional knowledge, and they're also the guardians of the diversity itself.
There are about 4,000 varieties of native potato in the world, and most of them are grown in the Andes, while only a handful are available in supermarkets around the world.
Between the two of us, we have been growing these seeds for 20 years, preserving them since the day of our wedding. My mother told me, now I want to teach my daughters.
It's a laboratory that's not managed by scientists, but it's a laboratory that is basically more than 10,000 years of evolution in the hands of farmers.
I can't let them be forgotten, because all the flavors, I know now how to grow them, and in that way I can keep the varieties alive.
Our mission here at CNN, the news comes first. You really work as hard as you can getting the facts. It is critically important.
To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the situation where we have breaking news.
I'm Richard Crest in New York, and this is CNN.
He's interviewed 5 U.S. presidents, authored 7 books, and has an independent voice that resonates.
What happened to when we were united against a common enemy?
He's raw, unique, and one of America's most important talk show hosts. Watch Smirconish, Saturday on CNN.
I'm Linda Kincaid in Atlanta, and this is CNN.
As Russian aggression continues in Ukraine, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the impact is playing out globally. The secretary told reporters in Bangkok that Russia's months-long blockade of Ukrainian ports is leading to catastrophic food shortages in parts of the world.
You asked about the impact of the Russian aggression in Ukraine on food insecurity and the impact potentially on Sri Lanka. Well, I think we're seeing that impact around the world. And it may be one of the contributing factors to what's happened in Sri Lanka, although I think there were, as I just said, many others that have come together.
Right, as you said, the war having a devastating impact on Somalia as well. Its access to critical food supplies worsened by both the Russian invasion of Ukraine and years of drought. CNN's Clarissa Ward has more.
On the edge of the Naim camp just outside Somalia's capital, Zamzam Mohammed shows us the fresh graves of those who have died here.